The sound of metal handcuffs echoed across the marble lobby. Every conversation stopped. The concierge dropped a suitcase. A child let go of his mother's hand. Guests turned. Employees froze. 2 Chicago police officers forced a black hotel employee against a marble pillar. Hands behind your back, you levantar. The younger officer snapped the cuffs shut. Click, click. The sound echoed through the 5-star Grand Regent Hotel. Nearly 50 people pulled out their phones. Someone whispered, "He finally got caught." Another shook his head. I knew something about him felt off. Standing only a few feet away, Regional Operations Director Daniel Whitmore slowly adjusted his tailored suit, then smiled. Not nervous, not surprised, satisfied, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Marcus Carter looked at him for only a second. No anger, no panic, no fear, just disappointment. Whitmore noticed. He walked closer so every guest could hear. "I trusted you. I defended you. And this is how you repay this company?" The lobby immediately turned against Marcus. People nodded. Someone started live streaming. A hotel employee quietly whispered, "I can't believe Marcus would steal." Another answered, "I can. Quiet people always hide something." Officer Reynolds grabbed Marcus by the arm. "You have the right to remain silent." Marcus nodded. "I know. You understand your rights? I've heard them before." The older officer frowned. There was something unusual about Marcus. Most guilty people argued. Most innocent people begged. Marcus did neither. Instead, he calmly looked toward the front entrance, almost as if he was waiting for someone. Officer Reynolds noticed. "Who are you looking for?" Marcus answered softly. "I'm hoping he doesn't come." Before Reynolds could ask what that meant, the hotel's revolving doors slowly began to turn. One, single, guest, walked inside. Late 60s, gray beard, old leather jacket, simple baseball cap. Nothing about him looked important. He quietly rolled a small suitcase across the polished floor. Nobody paid him any attention, except Marcus. For the first time since the handcuffs clicked shut, Marcus looked worried. Not for himself, for the old man. He whispered under his breath, "No, please don't let him see this." The stranger stopped walking. His eyes landed on the handcuffs, then on Marcus. His face became completely expressionless. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't speak to the police. He didn't even look at the boss. Instead, he slowly turned around, looked directly at the hotel security cameras mounted above the lobby, and quietly smiled, as if he had just discovered something nobody else had noticed. The hotel lobby remained frozen. Even the fountain in the center seemed louder than before. Officer Reynolds tightened his grip on Marcus's arm. "Let's go." Marcus nodded without resistance. As they walked toward the entrance, his eyes drifted back toward the security cameras mounted above the reception desk. Just for a second, Officer Reynolds noticed. "You seem awfully interested in those cameras." Marcus smiled politely. "I was just wondering if they're still recording." The officer frowned. "What kind of question is that?" Marcus didn't answer. He simply looked forward again. That single sentence lingered in Reynolds' mind. Behind them, Daniel Whitmore clapped his hands once. "Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely apologize for this unfortunate situation." He forced a professional smile toward the guests. "The Grand Regent Hotel has zero tolerance for theft. If any guest experienced inconvenience this morning, your dinner tonight will be complimentary." Several guests nodded approvingly. One businessman even applauded. "That's how a real manager handles things," Whitmore smiled. Exactly the reaction he wanted. His reputation remained spotless. Marcus's was already falling apart. Near the reception desk, 23-year-old receptionist Emily Sanders couldn't move. She had worked with Marcus for almost 3 years. She remembered the time an elderly guest left a diamond bracelet worth thousands of dollars in room 1807. Marcus found it while repairing an air conditioner. Instead of quietly handing it to management, he spent nearly 2 hours tracking down the owner himself. Another time, a famous actor accidentally left an envelope containing nearly $50,000 in cash. Marcus returned every dollar. No cameras, no applause, no reward. He simply said, "It wasn't mine." Emily whispered to herself, "No, this isn't right." Outside, rain had begun falling. News reporters were already setting up cameras across the street. Officer Reynolds looked surprised. "How did the media get here this fast?" His younger partner shrugged. No idea. Whitmore answered before either officer could think further. Someone from the hotel must have called. His answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Reynolds noticed. He said nothing. The older man who had entered moments earlier quietly rolled his suitcase toward the concierge desk. He didn't look at Marcus again. Instead, he politely asked, "Checking in." The concierge smiled nervously. "Of course, sir. Your name?" The man removed an old leather wallet. "Thomas Walker." The concierge typed quickly, then frowned. "I'm sorry. I don't seem to have a reservation." Thomas smiled. "I know. I never made one." The concierge looked confused. Then, Thomas slid a black credit card across the counter. "I'll take whichever room overlooks the front entrance." Emily looked up. Why would anyone specifically request a room overlooking the entrance? The concierge handed him a registration form. Thomas never looked down. His eyes remained fixed on the security monitors behind the desk. Officer Reynolds reached the patrol car. Before opening the rear door, his radio crackled. "Unit 12. Come in." He picked it up. "Go ahead." Dispatch sounded uncertain. "Quick question. Did you personally verify the evidence package?" Reynolds frowned. "What do you mean?" "The chain of custody form is missing a signature." He looked back toward the hotel. "What signature?" "The officer who supposedly collected the evidence." Reynolds' expression hardened. "So who collected it?" A brief silence. Then Dispatch answered. "That's the problem. Nobody knows." The line went dead. Inside the lobby, Emily quietly opened the employee scheduling system. She wasn't looking for Marcus. She was looking for something else. The security office. Every overnight shift was listed, except one, between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. The entire log was blank. No guard assigned. Impossible. The Grand Regent never left its security room unattended. Never. Emily whispered, "Who erased this?" She quickly reached for her phone and snapped a picture of the screen. Just as she did, the monitor suddenly refreshed. The blank hour disappeared. A new name appeared. Authorized edit, Daniel Whitmore. Emily's heart started pounding. She immediately locked her phone. Someone had changed the records. Today, just minutes ago. Across the lobby, Thomas Walker accepted his room key. "Thank you." As he turned away, his gaze settled once again on the bank of security monitors. One screen briefly flickered. Only for half a second. Most people never would have noticed. Thomas did. He quietly smiled. Not because he understood what happened. Because someone had made a mistake. A very expensive mistake. Outside, Officer Reynolds helped Marcus into the patrol car. Before closing the door, he asked quietly, "I've arrested people for 20 years. You know what's bothering me?" Marcus looked up. "No, officer. You haven't asked me once why you're being arrested." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Would the answer change anything?" Reynolds didn't reply. Because, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure it would. He closed the door. As the patrol car pulled away, Marcus looked back at the hotel one last time. Not at his boss, not at the crowd, not at the reporters. He looked only at the old man standing beneath the revolving doors. Thomas gave the smallest nod. Marcus closed his eyes, almost as if that single nod told him everything he needed to know. The patrol car disappeared into the rain. Inside, Marcus sat quietly, staring through the rain-covered window. Officer Reynolds kept checking the rearview mirror. Most suspects asked questions. Some cursed, others begged. Marcus simply watched the city pass by. Finally, Reynolds broke the silence. "You've done this before." Marcus looked up. "Excuse me?" "The handcuffs. You didn't panic. You knew exactly how to stand. You even turned your wrists before I cuffed you." Marcus smiled faintly. "I've learned that fighting handcuffs only makes them tighter." Reynolds didn't respond. Something about Marcus felt different. Back at the Grand Regent Hotel, Daniel Whitmore walked into his private office and immediately locked the door. The confident smile vanished. He opened his desk drawer. Inside lay a second cell phone. One no employee knew existed. He dialed a number from memory. The call connected after one ring. "It's done," a deep voice answered. "Are you sure? I watched them drive away." "Good." Whitmore walked to the window overlooking the entrance. "But there's a problem." "What now?" Someone unexpected showed up. A long silence followed. "Who?" "I don't know." "Older man." Gray beard. He kept watching the security cameras. The voice on the phone suddenly became serious. Did he say anything? Not much. But Whitmore hesitated. He made me uncomfortable. Another pause. Then the voice replied quietly. Find out who he is. The call ended. Whitmore looked out the window again. For the first time all morning. He looked nervous. Meanwhile, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the missing security footage. She knew she shouldn't, but something told her Marcus needed someone to ask questions. She quietly left the reception desk, walked down the employee hallway, stopped outside the security office. The door was locked. That had never happened before. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. Just as she reached for the handle, a voice behind her spoke. Looking for someone? Emily jumped. It was Frank Delgado, the hotel's head of security. 6'3", former Marine, normally calm. Today, he looked exhausted. Emily hesitated. I needed yesterday's lobby footage. Frank studied her face carefully. Why? I don't think Marcus stole anything. Frank remained silent, then quietly said, Go back to work. Emily frowned. You don't believe it either, he interrupted. I said, Go back to work. His voice wasn't angry. It sounded protective. Across the lobby, Thomas Walker slowly sipped a cup of black coffee. He had chosen a seat with a perfect view of both the elevators and the reception desk. Most guests never noticed details. Thomas noticed everything. The nervous concierge, the security guard checking his watch every 30 seconds, Whitmore walking past the lobby 3 times in 10 minutes, and one small cleaning cart parked beside the ballroom. It shouldn't have been there. He quietly smiled. Interesting. At the police station, Marcus was escorted into interview room 3. Officer Reynolds placed a file on the table. I'll ask again. Did you steal confidential guest files? Marcus looked at the folder. No. Did you enter the executive offices this morning? Yes. Reynolds leaned forward. So you admit it? Marcus nodded. I entered, but I didn't steal anything. What were you doing there? Marcus answered without hesitation. I was fixing the air conditioning unit. Reynolds opened the file. Funny. The maintenance log doesn't mention any repair. Marcus calmly replied. It wouldn't. Why not? Because someone removed it. Reynolds stared at him. That's a serious accusation. Marcus shrugged slightly. I'm simply telling you what happened. Before Reynolds could ask another question, the interview room door opened. A young forensic officer stepped inside. Detective. What? We've got a problem. Reynolds sighed. What now? The fingerprints. What about them? They're missing. What do you mean they're missing? The guest files don't have Marcus Carter's fingerprints on them. Silence. The forensic officer continued. They don't have anyone's. Reynolds frowned. That's impossible. They were wiped completely clean. Marcus quietly looked down at the table. He wasn't surprised. Back at the hotel, Emily sat alone during her lunch break. She opened the photo she'd secretly taken of the security log. Something caught her attention. A tiny number in the corner. Camera 14. She frowned. Marcus had supposedly been caught on camera 8. So, why had Whitmore edited camera 14? Unless camera 14 had recorded something he never wanted anyone to see. Emily immediately stood up. She knew exactly where camera 14 was located. Not outside the executive office, but in the underground employee parking garage. The place where almost no guests ever went. At that exact moment, Thomas Walker quietly left his coffee untouched. He looked at his watch, then toward the elevators. Softly, almost to himself, he said, You're running out of time. No one heard him. No one, except the hotel bellman standing nearby. The young bellman frowned. Sir? Thomas smiled politely. Nothing. I was just thinking out loud. As Thomas walked toward the elevators, the bellman noticed something unusual. The old man's right arm moved with perfect discipline, straight posture, measured steps, every movement precise, like someone who had spent a lifetime following military routine. The bellman whispered, Who is that guy? Thomas disappeared into the elevator. A second later, the elevator doors closed. On the mirrored wall inside, his reflection briefly revealed something hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket. A faded tattoo, an eagle, an anchor, and a trident. But before anyone could see it clearly, the doors shut. Rain continued pouring outside the police station. Officer Reynolds closed Marcus's file and leaned back in his chair. For nearly 15 minutes, Marcus had answered every question, calmly, clearly, without changing a single detail. Most suspects eventually contradicted themselves. Marcus never did. Reynolds tapped his pen against the desk. "Mr. Carter, I've interviewed hundreds of people. Some were guilty, some were innocent, but I've never met anyone quite like you." Marcus smiled faintly. "I'll take that as a compliment." Before Reynolds could continue, a knock came at the door. A young desk officer stepped inside. "Detective, there's someone asking to see you." Reynolds frowned. "Who?" He wouldn't give his name. He only said, "Tell the officer arresting Marcus Carter that he should ask better questions." Marcus lowered his eyes, almost as if he already knew who it was. Meanwhile, back at the Grand Regent Hotel, Daniel Whitmore couldn't sit still. He paced across his office. Every few seconds, he looked out the window toward the empty parking lot. Then he checked his phone. No new messages. He dialed the same number again. This time, no answer. He muttered under his breath, "Where are you?" A soft knock interrupted him. "Come in." Emily stepped inside carrying a folder. "You asked for yesterday's maintenance reports." Whitmore forced a smile. "Leave them." As Emily placed the folder on his desk, she noticed something unusual. A hotel key card, lying half-hidden beneath a file. It wasn't a guest key. It was a master access card. Only 3 people in the entire hotel possessed one: the general manager, head of security, and Daniel Whitmore. Emily looked at it for only a second before leaving. But something about it stayed in her mind. Back at the station, Officer Reynolds walked into the visitor's lobby. The same elderly man from the hotel stood quietly near the coffee machine. Simple leather jacket, baseball cap, calm expression. Nothing about him demanded attention. Yet somehow, everyone nearby kept glancing at him. Reynolds approached. "You asked for me?" The old man nodded. "You arrested Marcus Carter this morning." "That's right. I'd like to ask you something." Reynolds crossed his arms. "I'm the one asking questions." The old man smiled. "Fair enough. Did Marcus resist arrest?" "No." "Did he threaten anyone?" "No." "Did he ask for a lawyer?" "No." "Did he ask why he was being arrested?" Reynolds paused. "No." The old man nodded slowly. "Interesting. What is?" He wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about something else. Reynolds frowned. "You know him?" The stranger looked through the station window toward the interview room. "I know the kind of man he is. Sometimes, that's enough." Reynolds studied him carefully. "You still haven't told me your name." The old man reached into his wallet. He didn't pull out an ID. Instead, he removed an old photograph. The edges were faded from years of being folded. In it, a much younger Marcus stood beside the old man. Both were covered in dust. Behind them, collapsed buildings and emergency vehicles. Marcus couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Reynolds stared at the picture. "What happened here?" The old man looked at the photograph for a long moment. "There was an explosion overseas. My son was trapped beneath concrete. The rescue team said he was already dead." He looked back at Reynolds. Marcus ignored every warning. He crawled into a building everyone else was running away from. He carried my boy out on his own shoulders. Reynolds remained silent. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't paid. He simply saw someone who needed help. The old man's voice grew quieter. "I've spent every day since then trying to repay a debt that can never truly be repaid." At that moment, the station television switched to the local news. A reporter stood outside the Grand Regent Hotel. "The hotel has released a statement praising management for their swift response to today's employee theft case." The old man looked at the screen, then quietly said, "They're celebrating far too early." Reynolds turned toward him. "What do you mean?" For the first time, the old man's expression hardened. He reached into his jacket. This time, he placed a worn military identification card on the desk. Reynolds picked it up. His eyes widened. The card read, "Commander Thomas Walker, Ret. United States Navy SEAL." Reynolds slowly looked back at the man standing before him. Thomas met his eyes and said calmly, "Detective, I think it's time you arrested the right person." The room fell completely silent. Officer Reynolds looked down at the military identification card once more. "Commander Thomas Walker, Ret. United States Navy SEAL." His heartbeat quickened. He had heard that name years ago during police tactical training. Not because Thomas Walker was famous, but because instructors often used one of his hostage rescue operations as a case study. Reynolds slowly looked up. "You were Commander Walker?" Thomas smiled politely. "I was, a long time ago." The younger officer standing nearby immediately straightened his posture. Without thinking, he gave a respectful nod. "Sir." Thomas returned the nod. "At ease, officer." Inside interview room 3, Marcus noticed the sudden change outside the glass window. Two officers who had barely looked at him before were now whispering nervously. One kept glancing toward Thomas. The other immediately walked away to make a phone call. Marcus quietly sighed. "I was hoping this wouldn't happen." Reynolds looked at Thomas. "If Marcus means that much to you, why didn't you stop us from arresting him?" Thomas calmly answered. "Because that's not how justice works. If officers have a lawful warrant, they should do their job." He paused before adding, "But they should also make sure they're arresting the right person." Those words stayed with Reynolds. Back at the Grand Regent Hotel, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the master access card she'd seen on Whitmore's desk. Something about it bothered her. She walked downstairs to the employee locker room. Marcus's locker was still open. Most of his belongings had already been packed into a cardboard box by management. His old coffee mug, a worn paperback novel, a family photograph. As Emily carefully placed everything back inside, she noticed a folded envelope taped beneath the top shelf. It simply read, "If anything happens to me, don't trust appearances." Her hands began to shake. She slowly opened it. Inside was a small flash drive, nothing else, no explanation, no note, just the drive. Emily whispered, "Marcus, what were you trying to protect?" At the police station, Detective Reynolds returned to the interview room. This time, he wasn't carrying another accusation. He sat down quietly. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Reynolds slid a bottle of water across the table. Marcus looked surprised. "Thank you." Reynolds folded his hands. "I owe you an apology." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You haven't proven I'm innocent yet." "No, but I judged you before asking the right questions." Marcus smiled. "That happens more often than people think." Reynolds nodded slowly, then asked, "Tell me something honestly. When they arrested you, why did you keep looking at the hotel cameras?" Marcus looked through the interview room window. For the first time, his calm expression changed. "I wasn't looking at the cameras." Reynolds frowned. "No?" Marcus slowly shook his head. "I was looking at the person watching the cameras." Detective Reynolds sat upright. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned forward slightly. "The man who framed me was never standing in the lobby. He was watching from somewhere else." Silence. Those words changed everything. At that exact moment, Emily arrived at the police station, breathing heavily, still holding the flash drive. "I need to speak with Detective Reynolds." The desk officer looked at her. "About what?" She swallowed. "It's about Marcus Carter. I found something he wanted someone to see." Before the officer could answer, Thomas Walker stepped out of the hallway. His eyes immediately locked onto the flash drive in Emily's hand. For the first time since arriving, his face showed genuine surprise. He walked toward her. "Where did you get that?" Emily hesitated. "It was hidden inside Marcus's locker." Thomas closed his eyes for a brief moment, then quietly said, "Thank God, they didn't find it first." Detective Reynolds looked from Thomas to Emily, then to the small flash drive, one tiny piece of plastic. Yet somehow, everyone in the room suddenly understood. This wasn't just about a stolen file anymore. Whatever was inside that drive had been worth framing an innocent man, and someone was willing to destroy his life to keep it hidden. The police station became eerily quiet. Detective Reynolds stared at the small flash drive resting in Emily's trembling hand. Thomas Walker spoke first. "Play it." Within minutes, the flash drive was connected to a computer inside the detective's office. The screen flickered. A timestamp appeared. 2:17 a.m., underground parking garage, camera 14. Emily immediately recognized it. The camera Whitmore deleted. The recording began. Marcus stepped into the underground garage, carrying a toolbox. He wasn't alone. Standing beside a black SUV was Daniel Whitmore. The two men appeared to be talking. Detective Reynolds frowned. "This doesn't prove anything." Thomas remained silent. He kept watching. Suddenly, a third man walked into view. His face was hidden beneath a hood. He handed Whitmore a black briefcase. Whitmore opened it. Bundles of cash. Thousands of dollars. Marcus immediately stepped backward. Even through the silent footage, everyone could see the shock on his face. Whitmore quickly closed the briefcase and stepped toward Marcus. The video had no audio, but his body language said everything. He was threatening him. Marcus slowly shook his head, then walked away. Whitmore watched him leave, his expression cold. The video ended. The room fell silent. Detective Reynolds slowly leaned back in his chair. So Marcus saw the payoff. Thomas nodded. And from that moment, Whitmore had a reason to get rid of him. Emily whispered. He framed Marcus. Thomas answered quietly. Because honest people are dangerous. Before anyone could speak again, Officer Jenkins rushed into the room. Detective! What? We've got a problem. Reynolds stood. What happened? Whitmore just left the hotel. He packed his office. And according to hotel security, he's heading toward the airport. Reynolds grabbed his jacket. Let's move. 20 minutes later, Chicago International Airport. Whitmore hurried through the terminal, pulling a small suitcase behind him. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. He ignored every call. He just needed to board the flight. 1 more minute, and he'd be gone. As he approached the security checkpoint, a calm voice came from behind him. Going somewhere? Whitmore stopped. Slowly, he turned around. Detective Reynolds stood there. Beside him, Marcus, still wearing the same wrinkled hotel uniform. The handcuffs were gone. Thomas Walker stood quietly a few feet behind them. Whitmore forced a smile. This is a misunderstanding. Reynolds shook his head. No, it was a setup. Whitmore looked toward Marcus. I can explain. Marcus calmly replied. You already did. On camera 14. Whitmore's face went pale. You found it? Emily stepped forward holding the flash drive. You forgot one thing. You deleted the hotel's copy. But Marcus kept his own. Whitmore closed his eyes. For the first time, he realized there was nowhere left to run. Detective Reynolds removed a new pair of handcuffs. The same metallic click echoed through the airport terminal. But this time, they closed around Daniel Whitmore's wrists. Guests stopped walking. Airport staff turned to watch. One businessman whispered, Isn't that the hotel executive from the news? Another person quietly lowered their phone. The same man who had smiled while Marcus was arrested now stood handcuffed before everyone. Marcus simply watched. No smile. No celebration. Only relief. As officers escorted Whitmore away, Detective Reynolds turned toward Marcus. I owe you more than an apology. Marcus shook his head. You owe yourself one. Reynolds looked confused. Marcus smiled gently. You stopped looking for the easiest suspect and started looking for the truth. Thomas Walker placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. I told you years ago, character always shows itself. Marcus laughed softly. You also told me, never confuse being quiet with being weak. Thomas smiled. I see you remembered. 3 weeks later, the Grand Regent Hotel held a staff meeting. Every employee gathered in the same marble lobby where Marcus had been handcuffed. The general manager stepped onto the stage. I have one announcement. He looked toward Marcus. Effective immediately, Marcus Carter has accepted the position of Director of Employee Integrity and Safety. The lobby erupted into applause. Emily smiled proudly. Even Officer Reynolds attended the ceremony. Afterward, he walked over to Thomas. I've been meaning to ask you something. Thomas chuckled. What? Why did you come to the hotel that morning? Thomas looked toward Marcus. My wife and I were celebrating our anniversary. We had planned to surprise Marcus with breakfast. He smiled. Instead, I found him teaching everyone else what real courage looks like. Marcus looked around the lobby. The same place where people had whispered, he must be guilty. Now, those same people stood and applauded him. Not because he had fought back. Not because he had shouted the loudest. But because he had trusted that the truth would eventually speak louder than any accusation. The strongest people don't prove their character when life is easy. They prove it when the whole world believes they're guilty, and they still refuse to lose their integrity.